Good morning to everyone here today. We warmly welcome you to the 10th International Conference on Gothic Literature, which has the fear of contagion and the Gothic as its theme in this edition. This colloquium is conducted thanks to the valuable participation of the Facultad de Filosofía y Letras UNAM and the Escuela de Humanidades y Educación from the University Tecnológico de Monterrey. It is my pleasure and an honor to participate in this event and to have the priceless participation of three panelists. Alexandra Cebada, Antonio Alcalá, Aurora Piñeiro, and Helena Torres. I would also like to remind you that there are two other panels scheduled for today at 12 and 4 p.m. and we invite you all to assist. At the end of the lectures, we will move on to a question and answer session. Let's begin with the presentation of the panelists. Tony Alcalá is a researcher and director of the Humanistic Studies Department at Tecnológico de Monterrey, Mexico City. He is one of the pioneers in the recent raise of interest for the Gothic in Mexico. He is founder of the International Gothic Literature Congress, which has been held biennially at Mexico City since 2008. His work includes having published in journals of Mexican universities and edited the Gothic Studies special issue, Nautical Gothic, the presence of the Gothic on and under the sea. He has also contributed to the volumes accompanying to American Gothic, Tropical Gothic in Literature and Culture, Oscuras Latitudes, una cartografía de los estudios góticos, and edited the collection Doubles and Hybrids in Latin American Gothic. He is currently working on a monographic study of nautical horror. He will present the lecture titled The Role of Evil in 21st Century, the Image of Satan in the Lyrics of the metal band Behemoth. Please keep in mind for all of the panelists that you have 20 minutes to share your presentation. Please, Tony, go ahead.
Thank you, Gabi. Thanks to everyone here in the audience. Thanks to these great people that answered the call for papers and are here with me in the panel. It's going to be very enjoyable. So, as Gabi said, it's Gothic evil and extreme metal in the 21st century, the image of Satan in the lyrics of the band Behemoth. I can start with considering that from the existence of the two moments that mark the boundaries of life, birth and death, the human experience is lived in a scenario of multiple binomials. As a result, from its origins in the monotheistic Hebrew and Christian traditions, our Western civilization has tended to conceptualize the world in binary opposites, resulting in an interaction of otherness where one concept bases most of its definition on being what is contrary to the other. On such a scenario, the order required for the creation of life needs the existence of a previous chaos. And if there is a unique God responsible for the existence and continuity of life under certain norms that are to be respected, there is also an everlasting evil side with opposing interests, that is, a Gothic doppelganger permanently plotting against the intentions of its counterpart. The purpose of this paper, then, is to explore the use of this extreme undead character as a reference for a call to a balanced and individualized return to human nature in the last two albums of the extreme metal band Behemoth, The Satanist from 2014 and I Love You at Your Darkest 2018. Through the evocation of Satan, the band emphasizes the arbitrariness of social norms that confine human behavior inside the dual movement between good and evil. Satan, the devil, Lucifer are names associated with the same concept. I quote from Rosemary Ellen Gilly, the thoroughly evil counterpart of the all-good God. Such entity was naturally associated with the Hebrew term Satan, the one who obstructs. Centuries later, Milton created his heroic fallen angel, Lucifer, Latin for light reigning. This added attractive touches to his figure, who responds to the need of monotheistic religions to polarize good and evil, as I mentioned. Carl Jung identified that both norm and opposition are constitutive parts of the same system. Quoting from him, the shadow belongs to the light as the evil belongs to the good, and vice versa. As a result, humanity has a share in both sides and can be judged just as well from the left as from the right, without our becoming any the wiser. Indeed, we can only open up the opposition again. However, since, quoting from Russell, the essential function of Satan in the New Testament is to obstruct the kingdom of God and as long and thoroughly as he can, then Christianity tends to impose a choice to follow either God or Satan, thus removing the choice between both proper to human nature. The result of imposing this dualistic view on societies is the creation of a Gothic evil doppelganger, the one I mentioned, always policing the boundaries of what means to be good and threatening, with luring us towards its evil side. Actually, Eugene Thacker proposes to read the devil, I quote, as a metaphor for the nature of the human and the relation of human to human, even when this relation is couched in terms of the boundary between human and non-human. Thacker suggests to think beyond the possibility of the existence of any supernatural creature, looking forward to influence and even possess humans with evil. To achieve this perspective, he identifies the existence, I quote, of an anthropological motif through which we human beings project, externalize, and represent the darker side of the human to ourselves. This abject entity is responsible to the need to represent our dark, repressed impulses in an anthropomorphic figure whom we can blame for our misbehavior. It has accompanied our civilization for many centuries as an undead force that policies the precepts of conduct dictated by Christianity. Following him means to fall from the grace of God and thus become one more in his group of fallen angels. Through this process, the Church has alienated humanity from its own nature by imposing a choice between the two extremes, represented by God and the forbidden darkness of the devil. However, there have always existed non-conformist minds that, guided by the curiosity inherent to humanity, have dared to challenge limits and transgress them with extreme proposals. In this regard, Volcarus claimed that the human intellect would never have developed without the human disposition to challenge the establishment. I quote from him, Satan produces the unrest in society, which, in spite of many inconveniences, makes the world move onward and forward. He is the patron of progress, investigation, and invention. This rebellious figure is the agent of disruption invoked in the lyrics of the band Behemoth. In the 17th century, Milton's Paradise Lost, which I referred to, was responsible for coining the majestic image of Satan and his hosts that still persist to our days. The evil lord in Paradise Lost is paralleled with Prometheus and presented as the epitome of the mutineer against the tyrannic order, as the opposite to the tyranny of the crown validated by its local church. Milton personified in this being the spirit of the English Revolution, the concept of the rebellious angel as champion of individuality that has persisted together with a growing conviction that human will is responsible for evil and good, aside from any existence of supernatural forces that may be looking forward to guiding or tempting us. At the end of the 18th century, Matthew Lewis's The Monk and William Blake's The Marriage of Helen and Phelp called attention to the fact that no evil or good is absolute, since it is the choice of any human being to freely decide courses of action in life. As a result, in the contemporary Western thought, Satanism is more generally concerned with the liberation from the perceived constraints of humanity than with the worshipping of the devil. The black metal movement that arose in Northern Europe in the 1990s and which strongly influenced Behemoth relied on the image of Satan as a way to express a religious stand towards the social norms and the religious policy of morality. In this context, it is needed to consider that the more modern societies attempt to free themselves from their barbaric pasts, the more this later erupts to prove that what arose from it cannot exist without its everlasting influence. In Harlan Killing's words, in the Gothic, the past is never completely finished with. Instead, it has a nasty habit of bursting through into the present, displacing the contemporary with the supposedly outdated. This correspondence creates a dynamic relationship under which the past becomes distant and close, desirable and feared, inspiring and loathsome. Each pair of opposites happen at the same time, thus creating a scenario under which certainty collapses. In the Gothic tradition, there is an insistence on conceiving the past as a destructive field inhabited by the cruelty that arises from the tyranny and superstition that are implied by a regression from our rational times. The lack of proper dialogue with the past causes unstable identities. They crumble down when facing the impossibility to maintain the barriers that insist on defining the individual inside a flame isolated from the past, a frame isolated from the past. In order to prevent this from happening, ancient times are silenced. It is only in museums and books that we can find those ages when the being was one with nature, under religious systems that worship the role of nature as mother of life. Those times are now restricted to the shape of relics, mere vestiges of what humanity once was. However, their presence is always physically visible, or it comes to our memory, proving that we are products of where we come from. As a result, the manifestation of the past in Gothic context reminds us in an indirect way, that our identities did originate from neither lineal nor fixed sources. They are the product of the confluence of multiple lines that follow varied paths. Thus, the Gothic insists that regardless of how much the present imposes repression on the natural past of the human being, we cannot deny our origin from the wild places where all life originated. It is in this context, to find a new dialogue with the past, that the black metal movement from the early 1990s appeared. Behemoth was formed in 1991 in the Polish city of Gdańsk. They oriented the rebellion against a society very strongly linked to the Catholic Church through combined references to the pagan Slavic past and Satanism in their lyrics. On one hand, they located in paganism a social construct lacking the weakness that characterizes contemporary societies. Former drummer Val Ravenlock, Adam Bursasko, his real name, claimed in 1994, I quote, "I hail Poland as the land of the Slavs, as the territory of pagan culture and the sanctuary of the nature. I hate Christianity as a religion which is directly responsible for the obliteration of the pagan Slavonic culture." This longing for the hidden past turned into the image of the individualizing rebel per excellence, Satan, as an ideal motive to strengthen the search for individualism. After 4 albums in between 95 and 98, the band consolidated a lyrical shift that distanced them from an earlier interest more focused on Slavic folk towards an extreme anti-Christian content. This becomes evident in the album Satanica from 99. My intention in further lines is to focus on the role of Satan, this undead opposite of God, in the lyrics of the 2 albums I mentioned, The Satanist and I Love You at Your Darkest. The band's leader and songwriter, Nergal, real name Adam Darsky, bases his lyrical style on an anti-Christian proposal that considers the church as the responsible for indoctrinating the aforementioned dualism of good versus evil, thus restricting humanity from acting on free will by labeling evil as the negative double to be avoided at all cost. In the search for an option to voice his thought, Nergal directed his interest to the occult, which influenced the band's lyrics with ideas from Aleister Crowley, whose philosophy called Thelema was influential to the band's album of the same name, Thelema.6 from 2000, as well as Austin Osman Spare, whose magic Saskia Cultos inspired the album of the same name released in 2002. The confluence of such sources is used by Nergal to express a call to follow human nature over the traditional limitations mentioned before. His use of the figure of Satan in the lyrics of the band's two latest albums appeals to the Miltonian proposal and its evolution discussed in previous lines. In fact, the song Ora pro nobis Lucifer from the Satanists praises the Dark Lord as an almighty being who, after having been wronged, becomes an antithesis of the Christian God. He is described as the undead Lord that forever will hold his kingdom and glory, the destroyer of heaven, the savior that offered temptation to Eve in Eden, and consequently liberated humanity from absolute order. This anti-Christian proposal escalates in the track In Absence of Light. This one, In Absence of Light, from the same album, which proposes a departure from doctrines and order into the Church of Man, where chaos reigns and human pride returns. Returns the need to respond to a divine creating power that has been revealed. The proposed result is the rise of a being who acts under a personal secular rule without any moral shackles. Further on, the call to a violent and powerful antithesis of the Christian idea of order and good is evoked in the lyrics of Angels 13 from the album I Love You at Your Darkest. Here the voice of individualizing evil foresees a reversal of the Miltonian fall of Lucifer, in that the destruction of God's army is brought about by the legions of Satan, whose voice claims the titles of both Christ and Serpent for himself. This implies that a balance of good and evil is part of the individual who rises against the tyranny of traditional dualism. The arbitrariness behind the insistence on absolute opposites is approached in the song Havoje Pantocrator from the same album. The mere anadromy, Jehovah, proposed in the title, anticipates the reversal of the Lord's Prayer expressed in the lyrics. The voice in the song addresses Satan as the eternal divine leader whose legions will bring havoc to the Christian heaven. Through this transgressive antithesis to a prayer central to Christianity, Nergal attacks the tradition that restricts human behavior to a binomial of extreme contraries and invalidates the natural mobility of human will, whose only limits are individual interest and needs. As shown in the preceding lines, the destructive language used by Nergal in his extreme attack against Christianity goes beyond just embracing anti-Christian values. The blasting sound produced by the accelerated beat of the drums and the fast guitar riffs accompanies an extreme lyrical content that relies on blasphemous images to remind listeners that human life possesses an ampler scope than the one limited to the reduction of possibilities, expressing the opposition of evil and truth. The image of Satan as an undead presence threatening the continuity of the order we know is used by Behemoth as a metaphor not of pure evil and hate, as the name of one of the earlier songs of the band may claim, but of the subversive minds that, like Nergal himself, permanently question the imposition of arbitrary rules that blind humanity from a consciously performed free will in contemporary societies. Consequently, behind the call to join the evil side, Behemoth offers an invitation to break the boundaries imposed by the good versus evil duality and turn such a position of doubles into an inclusive sphere where one can move freely. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Let's move on to our second panelist. Dr. Aurora Piñeiro is full professor in the English department at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She is author of El gótico y su legado en el terror, una introducción a la estética de la oscuridad, and editor of Rewriting Traditions, Contemporary Irish Fiction. Dr. Piñeiro will present the lecture titled I Never Left That Wood, Representations of Solastalgia and the Uncanny in Tana French's In the Woods and Sarah Phelps' Dublin Murders.
Thank you for being here, and thank you, Tani, for the opportunity to take part in this conference, which I celebrate has come back to its in-person mode. Just let me make sure that yes, there we are. So early in the morning and so heretic already after the paper we've heard. I Never Left That Wood, Representations of the Uncanny and Solastalgia in Tana French's In the Woods and Sarah Phelps' Dublin Murders. The Dublin Murder Squad series, 2007-2016, is composed by the first 6 novels published by Irish author Tana French. This collection explores the political and identity contradictions of the economic boom known as the Celtic Tiger period in Ireland, and which runs from 1995 to 2007, and thus so within the hybrid aesthetics of both crime and Gothic fictions. In the Woods, 2007, the first title in the series, showcases detectives Cassie Maddox and Rob Ryan as the main characters in a story where the themes of friendship, childhood trauma, memory, and the haunting of the past are intertwined with a search for truth in relation to the murder of a 12-year-old girl in the Knocknary Woods in County Dublin. Rob Ryan is the protagonist of the story. In this particularly violent case, will take him from the capital city to an archaeological site in the woods, where he will be forced to confront his own past experiences in this space as a dark and uncontrollable wooded hinterland. The aim of this paper is to analyze the representations of the forest in the novel by Tana French and in its television series adaptation, Dublin Murders from 2019, directed by Sarah Phelps, from the perspective of the eco-Gothic, an interdisciplinary critical discourse from which I will draw the concept of solastalgia, which, together with the uncanny, will articulate the focus of my reading. It is my contention that in both the novel and the TV series, the forest becomes a strategic arena where different types of collective and individual anxieties are staged. First, at a collective level, the woods become the grounds for a multi-layered clash of interests associated to, on the one hand, the preservation of a natural and cultural past, and, on the other hand, the construction of a motorway that will transform the wooded territories into residential development lands. This is the thread posed by a Celtic Tiger consumerism that conceives the forest exclusively as a resource to be exploited in the name of economic progress. And secondly, at an individual level, as Rob Ryan's return to this forest triggers a conflict between his memories of an early childhood spent there, and which he has constructed as an idyllic past when children were safe and could even lordly walk into an unspoiled natural environment, and the fact that he is forced to acknowledge a tragedy which took place in those woods in the summer of 1984. an event that brought that age of innocence to an end and which is ominously linked to his present murder investigation. In this sense, the forest becomes a source of horror for a protagonist incapable of coming to terms with a past that is haunted by the unsolved disappearance of 2 children in the woods, his unexplainable condition as a survivor, and the ambivalence of the potential explanations which oscillate between social violence and the supernatural. The novel opens with a prologue, apparently narrated by a third-person voice, that addresses readers in a straightforward fashion and introduces them to the story of 3 children who loved playing in the woods. And, well, these are images from the TV series, and this is the first quote from the novel, from the prologue in the novel. These 3 children own the summer. They know the wood as surely as they know the micro-landscapes of their own grazed knees. Put them down blindfolded in any dell or clearing, and they could find their way out without putting a foot wrong. This is their territory, and they rule it wild and lordly as young animals. However, these children will not be coming of age, this or any other summer. Contrary to the Hansel and Gretel, I committed suicide. Thank you, Tana. Contrary to the Hansel and Gretel story, where the siblings survive the forest trial, in this story the young ones will not come back, and I quote, wiser and bonded for life, unquote. It is in chapter 1 where readers learn that the narrative voice of the prologue is in fact Rob Ryan, the lead detective in the novel, who also explains that in that summer of August 13, 1984, Jermaine, or Jamie, and Peter disappeared forever, while the 3rd child, Adam, who happens to be Adam Robert Ryan, mysteriously survived the event and was found in a state of shock by policemen searching the woods. He suffered from a memory block that did not allow him to remember anything in relation to the traumatic experience in the woods. His parents sent him to a boarding school in England where he recreated his identity as Rob, adopted an English accent, and when back in Ireland became a detective in the Dublin Murders squad. An ironic turn of events makes Cassie and Rob the detectives in charge of investigating the present murder of a girl in the same Knocknary woods of the protagonist's childhood. Sorry. Contrary to the initial image of the children who supposedly mastered the forest, from the very first moment the detectives approach the woods, their experience is associated to disorientation, and the description of the space is characterized by hostility. I quote, Cassie had to dig out the map and find the exit. Then, no, I don't have it yet. Okay. Cassie had to dig out the map and find the exit. Then navigate us down potholed side roads edged with long grass, hedges grown wild and scraping at the windows, unquote. When Robert gets out of the car, he instinctively stops to check his gun, quote, clean, loaded, safety on, unquote. This scene is the beginning of a descent into a geographical and psychological darkness the main character will not manage to escape from. He breaks every rule in the police protocol, gets obsessed with solving the present case as well as the mystery of his past, while he sabotages both his career and his personal relationships. And all of this with the deep, dark wood as a central space. As a trend within eco-criticism, eco-Gothic is defined by Elizabeth Parker as a flavored mode through which we can examine our darker, more complicated cultural representations of the non-human world, which are all the more relevant in times of ecological crisis. It is concerned with texts with a pervasive sense of ecocentric and ambience independent of human presence. Transhistorical in its approach, it explores our ecophobic anxieties, our fears of nature, which are so often somewhat tinged with desire. The primary and consistent concern of the eco-Gothic is with the deliberate interrogation of the Gothic nature of Gothic nature. Parker's definition falls in line with the analysis of nature in Gothic texts presented by Andrew Smith and William Hughes in Eco-Gothic. According to these scholars, although representations of nature in mainstream Romanticism and Gothic texts share a common ground, quote, the Gothic vision is a more troubling one, unquote, because of the ambivalence that lies at the heart of Gothic aesthetics, an arena where nature is, quote, a more contested term, as it is one which, at least in its post-Radcliffean guise, appears to participate in a language of estrangement rather than belonging, unquote. In contrast to the more holistic approach to nature taken by Romantics, quote, it is the image of fragments which seems to persist in the Gothic, unquote. The Romantic attempt to get back to nature is, according to Smith and Hughes, a more problematic journey in Gothic works, as their, quote, presumptive dystopianism illustrates how nature becomes constituted as a space of crisis which conceptually creates a point of contact with the ecological, unquote. Although representations of threatening natural spaces in Gothic texts are diverse, and they include ice-capes as well as the seas and oceans studied in nautical Gothic, several scholars, including Liza Kruger, coincide in their conceptualization of the forest as the third space of Gothic imaginings, right after the castle and the convent. Robert Pope Harrison describes the forest as, quote, a place where the logic of distinction goes astray, where perceptions become promiscuous with one another and the straight line forms a circle, unquote. Elizabeth Parker states that there are three ways in which the forest commonly manifests as a Gothic locale. The first one is those texts, quote, in which the forest itself seems to come to life and is physically animate. The second one is texts in which the forest is home and habit to our monsters. And the third one is those texts where the forest is Gothicized because of an infecting human presence, unquote. In The Forest and the Eco-Gothic, Parker pays homage to Geoffrey Jerome Cohen's 7 Theses on Monsters, which I guess most of you are familiar with, and those produces a list of 7 theses or reasons why the forest is feared and manifests as a Gothic threat. These are her 7 theses. 1, the forest is against civilization. 2, the forest is associated with the past. 3, the forest is a landscape of trial. 4, the forest is a setting in which we are lost. 5, the forest is a consuming threat. 6, the forest is a site of the human unconscious. 7, the forest is an anti-Christian space or a pagan space, and in this sense it connects with some of the ideas mentioned by Professor Alcalá in his paper. As you can see, I emphasized the last 2 because I will only have time to talk about the last 2, so do not panic, I'm not going to go through all of them. So, although most of the previous theses are present in the novel by French as well as the TV adaptation by Phelp, for the purposes of this paper I will focus on the last 2 as they are directly linked to the notions of the uncanny and solastalgia. The deeper Ryan goes into the forest, the more fragmented childhood memories of the traumatic episode in the Knocknary Woods come back to him either in dreams or different degrees of consciousness. This process coincides with Freud's definition of the ominous or uncanny as, quote, that class of the terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar, or, I keep quoting from Freud, something repressed that recurs, and, again, nothing new or foreign, but something familiar and old established in the mind that has been stranged only by the process of repression, unquote. In this sense, stepping into the dark woods becomes a metaphor for the exploration of the unconscious mind, also referred to as the shadow in Lacanian psychoanalysis. But several aspects make this process particularly bitter in Rob's case, because he both desires and fears this recovery, because the memory fragments he gathers back are difficult to put together and do not seem to be enough for him to articulate a cohesive narrative of the past, and also because the memories of additional and unexpected violent events emerge and leave him in the midst of an even more labyrinthine mental and geographical forest. As the novel develops, ambivalence is reinforced. Although readers are provided with more information about the 1984 case of the missing children and the recent murder of 12-year-old Katie Devlin, the possibility of a supernatural reading of events is not eliminated. Rob feels constantly haunted by something, and this word is repeated several times, an unexplainable force or presence that is usually associated to animal noises or silhouettes and makes it possible for readers to believe that Rob was marked by some sort of evil or unknown power which lies in the dark woods and which is claiming him back. The TV series materializes this natural thread in the form of either oniric, hallucinatory visions of a wolf, a stag, or the actual sighting of a fox. Ironically, of all the animals mentioned in both texts, the TV one and the literary one, the most disquieting one is not a wild creature, but a dog which the archaeologists keep by the dig in the forest and which is associated to, I quote, the nasty black poodle of the epigraph at the beginning of the novel. A quote from Tony Kushner's A Bright Room Cold Day, which in turn takes us to Goethe's Faust, where the black poodle is the embodiment of Satan. When some of the most violent events in the story take place, a dog's barking or a dog's sniffing is heard, which increases the sense of the supernatural uncanny as a plausible interpretation. Tension grows to a point when Rob decides to confront the darkness and spend a night on his own inside the forest. Not a very clever idea, by the way. Once there, he provides readers with some of the most significant descriptions of this Gothic setting. Please have a look at the first quotation. It was like stumbling into the wreck of some ancient city. The trees swooped higher than cathedral pillars. They wrestled for a space, propped up great fallen trunks, leaned with the slope of the hill. Oak, beech, ash, others I couldn't name. The fact that he uses the language of human architecture to describe this natural space is telling of the impossibility to escape the human perspective when describing the approach to the natural world, and the lack of a different vocabulary takes us back to Smith and Hughes' assertion that in Gothic representations of nature, I quote, the key issue is how to find a language which owns the ecological and so anchor it as a site of coherent meaning, unquote. As Rob fails to do so, and the extra irony here is that his first name is Adam, the one who is supposed to know how to name things. As Rob fails to do so, the forest remains the natural other. A different section of the same long description reveals that Rob's present experience of the woods is being infiltrated by memories of this same space that come from the fatal summer day of his childhood, the second quote here. Great drifts of undergrowth and here and there a worn fragment of a stone wall. Muscular roots, green with moss and thicker than my arm. the low banks of the river tangled with brambles, sliding down on our hands and our backsides, oh, my leg, and overhung with elderberry clusters and willow. As you can see, in the parentheses, the use of the our, of the possessive adjective in the plural, shows that instead of the present experience, what is coming back to him is the experience of the 3 children in the past, when they had been there in that same space. As the borderline between the present and the past becomes thinner, other secrets or repressed affects come to the surface. First, we learn that he feels observed and about being judged by the forest. I quote, "I had a deep prickling sense that my presence had instantly been marked and that the wood was watching me with an equivocal collective gaze, not yet accepting or rejecting, reserving judgment," unquote. Yes. The notions of rejection and judgment included in these lines remain mysterious for a good number of pages. The episode of the night in the woods turns into a horrifying experience, and the character flies from the forest and finally finds shelter in his police car. However, 2 chapters later, both the protagonist and readers learn that the hidden and perturbing secret the forest has brought to the surface is the awareness that Rob does not only lament the disappearance of his 2 friends, and not only carries with him the guilt of having survived the tragic childhood incident, but that at the very core of his trauma lies the idea that he was not fit to be taken by the dark force that snatched the other 2 kids from human existence. And this is going to be my last quote from the novel. Sometimes I think about the sly, flickering line that separates being spared from being rejected. Sometimes I think of the ancient gods who demanded that their sacrifices be fearless and without blemish, and I wonder whether whoever or whatever took Peter and Jamie away, it decided I wasn't good enough. Well, here I'm going to omit a section, which, although I'm going to show you a definition of solastalgia, and then I go to my conclusions, which connect this feeling of this eco-anxiety of a world that is being destroyed with the idea of a pagan past represented by an object with an engraving of a druid, which appears at the end of the novel, and also in the TV series an engraving of with the representation of the Earl King. So I'm just going to read the closing lines. This is a leaf-shaped piece described by Rob as heavier than you would expect. Narrow groups, half worn away, formed a pattern on one side. I tilted it to the light. A man no more than a stick figure with the wide, pronged antlers of a stag. Though he decides not to take the gift with him, this stone, this metal piece that had been offered to him, the object leaves slender red marks across his palm. The image of the druid engraved on this metal piece, which the TV series substitutes for the more specific and sinister figure of the Earl King, preserves the idea of an ancient pagan power that is being ignored by the indolent attitude of the inhabitants of a secular era. The presence of two children wandering the site may be read as an unsettling announcement of more destructive events to come, as well as the red marks on Rob's palm, which may be a reminder of the fact that he still is a marked child who never left that wood. If so, Harrison's description of the forest would prove true, a Gothic space where the straight line forms a circle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's move to our next panelist. Helena Torres holds a BA in English Literature from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México and an MA in Irish Studies from the University of Liverpool. Her master's dissertation is a comparative analysis between U2's Burning to Stand Still and James Joyce's Evelyn. She has participated in the U2 conference with the paper A Reinterpretation of U2's Discography, Pop as a Transition Album, and in the 8th Gothic Congress with the paper Turns of the Screw, a comparative study of the Gothic elements in Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, and Veronica Francis' film Goodnight Mama. She has been a professor at the Instituto Tecnológico y de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey, Mexico City campus for 8 years. She has taught English for Spanish speakers, both students and professors, creative writing, academic writing, and is currently teaching a course on mythology. Besides her music, she's also interested in video games and certain weird stuff you can find in the internet. She will present the lecture titled This Place Feels Familiar, Backrooms, Internet Gothic, and the COVID-19 Pandemic.
So, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Tony, for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to share a panel with Dr. Piñeiro, who, by the way, was my synop when I graduated, and she kicked my ass. So, okay. I'm going to start with a small. How does this change? I'm just moving the things around. I cannot see.
Hold it down.
Yes, scroll it down? Good. All right. Okay, so this is special thanks for the people that supported me for this paper. They are both not here, but I appreciate their help. So, if you're not careful and you don't click out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the back rooms, where it's nothing but a sting of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum humbus, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you. Posted in the controversial 4chan internet forum, this was the text that accompanied a picture of what looked like an office or ancient hotel room covered with a dingy yellow wallpaper. This post attracted attention with users discussing how the room felt familiar to them, and even, I quote, many claim to have entered the black room speed dreaming, evoking a fearful nostalgia, end of quote. There is also fearful nostalgia in Charlotte Perkins' Guild on the yellow wallpaper, which might be the immediate visual reference when looking at the backroom's original picture. The activity of finding faces or creatures and patterns is something childlike, and as Rula Kawawa says, the character in Perkin Gilman's story has, I quote, a nostalgia for a lost and more authentic self, end quote. Lost selves are not only to be found in the yellow wallpaper, but also on the internet. As soon as the internet became a social tool, users started creating spaces in which they could share bits and pieces about themselves and their interests. From the extinct GeoCities communities to modern social media profiles and now TikTok. However, as time goes by, communities, websites, and profiles fade into obscurity or dereliction as their users abandon them for any reason. Tumblr user Fairy Cosmos describes this phenomenon in a post. And I quote, "The internet is an inherently haunted place if you think about it. It's so weird to see long-abandoned discussion boards stuck in a snapshot of the past. All conversations between kids from over a decade ago who have now grown into their own lives. Obituaries taking the form of half-finished profiles. And the silence that fills the gaps between. There is a constant ghostly record of each generation's thoughts, facts, their sense of humor. Back where the future was at their fingertips. Even stranger, people you used to know exist openly in that space, and they watch you watching them. There is always an underlying sense of reminiscing and time escaping or ever-shortening attention spans." And they finished, "What a fucking graveyard." End of quote. This post shows the concept of the internet as a place where users can find an archive of their lost, younger selves. The internet works as a sort of library, museum, time machine, and as mentioned before, a graveyard, but there is even more to it. Technology has not stopped the ancestral activity of storytelling, but it has rather enhanced it. For the internet gives a chance to writers and storytellers to create an audiovisual tale and then post it online for the world to see. And if it becomes viral, the story may branch off into unsuspected territories. That was the case of Slenderman, which many of you might know, which originated from a competition in the comedy web forum Something Awful, which asked for ideas for a modern myth meant to terrify people. A contributor called Eric Knudsen, under the pseudonym Victor Search, posed to alter photographs in which a tall, faceless figure could be seen lurking around groups of children. The pictures were supposedly from the 1980s, and the text spoke vaguely about disappearances linked to that sinister apparition. From then, in the words of folklorist Jeff Tolbert, and I quote, "The whole story just exploded. It became a phenomenon that nobody could have predicted." End of quote. Jeff Tolbert explains the phenomenon of Slenderman as a creepypasta, which are, I quote, "fictional stories that get copied and pasted across many parts of the internet, and that often play deliberately with the issue of belief and confuse the issue of their own reality." End of quote. As mentioned before, creepypasta can take advantage of all the tools technology offers in order to create an immersive and believable story regarding the elements of the living reality. One example is a creepypasta Ben Brown by Alex Phelp. In that story, a fortune user by the name of Jadusabul talks about his experience of getting a used Zelda Majora's Mask game in a yard sale, only to find out that the cartridge is haunted by a supernatural entity, and the game, as everyone knows it, is now plagued with unsettling details, such as people dying and corpses walking around. In a Colony website uppercut about this creepypasta, Martin Silverman says that this story is very effective because it manages to reinject a sense of childhood terror in something that should be familiar from our childhood years, like a video game playing in its entirety, so the video game is no longer a safe place. Silverman also mentions the effectiveness of the fear of digital media not acting as expected, or as Emily Crawford says in a paper from the International Conference of the Digital Games Research Association, there is a phenomenon of, I quote, "collective anxieties surrounding the fallibility and restrictions of digital technology." End of quote. This kind of fallibility has been named glitch horror. So if there was a moment in which the fallibility of digital technology became a very palpable fear, it was during the COVID pandemic. Humankind as a collective was now limited to working from their homes, and technology, especially the internet, became the way in which not only communications, but work life and social life started taking place. If not digitally connected, people were in their household, whether with their families or alone, but the physical world was, in some places, practically devoid of human interaction. So the pandemic gave us pictures of places which were bustling with human activity and then appeared deserted. This is from Munich. Those images had an eerie feeling to them, as if one could witness a ghastly or post-apocalyptic setting with humanity gone. That particular sensation came from the fact that spaces designed for human interaction appear unused or interrupted. So as Carl Emil Koch wrote, they, I quote, "connect to the basic human condition of ephemerality, the notion that nothing lasts forever, and they are spaces of transitions, of becoming instead of being," end of quote. This is what Koch calls a liminal space, or an emotional space. Starting from the idea of the liminal space, liminality is an important concept in Gothic literature, since it is a concept that embodies thresholds and spaces which are ambiguous or that exist in a boundary of some kind. The same applies to states of being. The idea of not belonging has always been shrouded in the mystery of not being able to classify or make sense out of something. It's the horror of the undefined. González, sorry about the pronunciation, wrote a piece for Days magazine. He went directly to the TikTok hashtag liminal space, and described them as, I quote, "spaces that can be defined by their in-betweenness, but that can also describe existential feelings of being neither here nor there," end of quote. When interviewed TikTok creators that create liminal space videos, Yeltsin notes that the scenarios that appear in those videos are mostly taken from 90s and early 2000s video footage, something that automatically evokes a feeling of nostalgia, and thus the liminal space becomes, as Koch puts it, an emotional space. One of the TikTok content creators, Moniker Your Local Breadmans, notes, and I quote, "liminal images just capture that feeling of being somewhere you've been before in better times, but the beauty of it is that it's personal to everyone," end of quote. This is complemented by a quote by a user of the In Dreams game website who goes by the nickname Dukenomics, and who says, and I quote, "for some reason, when you remove the people from an establishment that is usually very crowded and lively, what you're left with is something that lets your mind fill in the blanks and insert your own personal memories to fill the void of emptiness in that space," end of quote. I complemented with another quote by Katie Wickens from the website PC Gamer that says that, I quote, "the backroom phenomenon similarly takes her understanding of places as being designed for human use and enjoyment and strips it of almost all traces of humanity. The omission of human interaction is what many people attribute their discomfort to when browsing liminal spaces, since without human interactions to give these spaces context, and there is an emphasis in context, they are simply shells, architectural cadavers disconnected from all that we are. End of quote. In that way, the liminal space is defined by the human perspective on it, and the dichotomy of presence and absence, and then the meaning that every individual would grant to it, thus turning it into an emotional space and enhancing the undefinable characteristic that relates the Gothic to the liminal. So, as mentioned before, the pandemic was a moment in which people were removed from crowded spaces. Or, by a quote for Anthony Simcoe, I quote, "Liminal spaces have been an object of fascination for some time, and they attained a massive spike in popularity following the spring of 2020, the pandemic. With a plethora of streets, office buildings, and shopping centers emptying out, it's no question how so much content was generated around the subject." End of quote. And sure enough, since the backrooms are basically a collection of liminal spaces with extra lore created by internet users, it is very clear the pandemic pictures, like the ones I've shown before, granted enough material for liminal spaces and backrooms fans to work with. Simcoe gives in more insight into this exercise of creative writing that parts from this interpretation of empty spaces, saying that, I quote, "It reflects how our society is processing COVID-19, highlighting a new era of creative storytelling." End of quote. So the way the backrooms work is as follows. The player or subject in question has to no-clip, which is basically going through solid walls, out of reality through any part of the surroundings that would certainly allow the individual to go through them, no matter how solid they look. As a footnote, no-clipping comes from gaming terminology and is also a part of glitch horror. If the no-clipping is successful, then the individual would find themselves inside the backrooms at the starting level of level 0, which is the yellow wallpaper level. By doing certain actions or no-clipping in certain places, the backrooms visitor is able to advance to other rooms, which are illustrated through other liminal spaces photographs. The individual in the backrooms is looking to explore, to find a safe place, or to find a way back into the front rooms, which is the word the backrooms lore used to refer to our real world. So the backroom levels are varied and many, users can add new levels, and they constantly modify the backroom wiki related to this phenomenon. As a footnote, the backrooms wiki that I used was one in Spanish for something that will be explained. So I'm going to skip this one about Gothic spaces because Dr. Piñeiro basically talked about them. Here we have the castle and the forest. And then we have the ruins and the graveyard, because of course the cemeteries are a popular Gothic space, the archetypal threshold between life and death, and of course the cemetery finds its way into the backrooms in level -200. So we have the traditional Gothic spaces, but Carl Senf mentions that people begin to fear trends that are much closer to them. So we can also find urban landscapes. Level 11, or ruinous urban landscapes that are once again a reminder of post-apocalyptic fears, like level 1008. Houses and suburbia are also part of the backroom's imagination. We have the work of Kate Lucas that says the house is a domestic building with the same symbolic weight as a British castle or church because it became the ultimate class marker. So we also have houses in the backrooms. And we also have the suburbia because of course there is an element of Gothic called the suburban Gothic. Suburban Gothic is also an extension of the house replacing the castle. In quiet suburbia, anything that disturbs the peace of those homogeneous and ideally or theoretically peaceful communities should be hidden. So suburbia appears as level 9 in the backrooms, but the suburbs are darkened, and they bring the anxieties that those peaceful communities hide to the forefront and thus enhance the uncanny and the horror element. And of course, glitch horror finds its way into the backrooms. We have levels 404 and levels -404, which are inspired by the error 404 file not found message. And we also have the horror is inspired by the unknown or not found aspects of the level. There is also level that. I'm not going to repeat it. But according to the Backrooms wiki, it's the limit of 64-bit integers that a computer is able to handle. So the name of this level that is regarded by users as the last level of the backrooms, its references to computer language and the illustrations shared by the users are examples of glitch horror. So, The backgrounds mainly rely on user-generated content, as you can see, and new levels may or may not be accepted by the community, but there is also an interesting phenomenon. Oh, I didn't put it. Okay. So, going back to liminal emotional spaces being personal to everyone, the backgrounds wiki in Spanish developed a level called Latin America. Usually, of course, that was the reactions of the users. However, it is worth noting that when writing about what should not be done in order to not endanger yourself in that level, one instruction was, and I quote, if you say you want to make Latin America a better place, you will disappear, or if you're lucky, you will reappear in level death. Level death is one of the deadliest deaths of backrooms. So this kind of observations shed light on the shortcomings that the Latin American backrooms community endure in real life, and they become part of the Gothic horrors of a place. And authors, Gothic authors, or Latin American authors have done so in their books. There is a piece in La Vanguardia on Latin American Gothic, where Paloma Cruz Sotomayor talks about the work of many female Gothic authors, and mentions that one of the most common emotions in Latin America is fear. Cruz Sotomayor highlights the work of Maria Fernanda Ampur about migration and says that migrating is like walking in utter darkness, utterly alone. However, there is an element of fear in walking alone at night at a deserted place, even if you are in your own country. In a way, the Latin American backrooms community have taken the everyday Latin American Gothic and placed it in their storytelling, and they are evoking fears that belong to our community. But still, the level that predominates in the backrooms tend to be the ones that depict images related to childhood or teenage years. A search for backrooms levels related to school delivered the following results, at least on the first search page. Level 52, level minus 56, level 83, level 190, level 1398, even though in that level the school is described as being in ruins, level 1021 and level 494. And the description of this level is accompanied by a small text asking the reader whether they remember their old friends, the best years of their life, how it felt to be free and without responsibilities, and how it felt to leave all those years behind. A search for backrooms levels related to kindergarten or daycares delivered level 18, level 74, and an unnumbered level that is called cautious infancy. And notes on level 18 assure that this level is, and I quote, addictive to the ones that visit it, end of quote. That's level 18, by the way. And then we have a search for backrooms levels related to something that appears mostly in nostalgic media, which is arcade. And they delivered level 40, level 25, and levels 3999, and levels 3999.1. Notes on levels 399 say that the level's atmosphere oscillates between familiarity and comfort, or loneliness and anxiety. However, even if the levels play with horror, there is still looking back to the past, and now that the comfort has been mentioned, I quote Yeltsin Kai again, who says that excavating artifacts from the past, even if they come in the form of horror or backrooms, mean, and I quote, we can cushion ourselves from the harsh realities of the present, end of quote. It has become better to deal with the nostalgic horrors of the backrooms than with reality, even if the backrooms present more horrors, such as entities, which are a hot take in the backrooms community. In a Vice piece written by Andrew Lloyd, he talks about a user with the Reddit moniker Litbip, and he says, I quote, Litbip felt that there was no need for extra layers or hidden monsters. The strangeness of the place, the one with the yellow wallpaper, was more than enough, end of quote. In the forum which was launched, which is the subreddit True Backrooms, Lloyd writes, users, I quote, focus solely on the look and feel of the original fortune image. They embrace the fan interpretations that show how the yellow corridors or adjoining rooms should look like from a different angle, but they don't get involved in the spin-off fiction, end of quote. Even though analyzing just one image might seem very repetitive, there is an element of horror in repetition, and I quote Joseph Crawford. Repetition militates against hope, against the belief in the possibility of improvement or redemption, because the uncanny repetition suggests that neither time or distance can be relied upon. No matter how far you travel, how many miles or years or generations you put between yourself and the source of your fear, that from which you flee might still be waiting for you when you arrive. End of quote. What would be appealing of the whole True Backrooms movement, well, would be what Andrea Juranovsky talks about when talking about the Gothic look. The progress. Still, there are members of the backrooms community that do not agree with focusing on the original image, and they enjoy level progression, and they also enjoy the idea of entities. I interviewed some on Reddit, and a Reddit user who asked to be identified as Firester mentioned that entities have liminal characteristics, and that adds to the whole liminal thing and the liminal nature of the backrooms. Another user who asked to be identified by her name instead of her Reddit moniker, her name is Fatima Morales, she talked more about entities and even shared her favorite one, which is the monster under the bed. Research in the Backrooms Wiki about this entity revealed that what should be done in order to avoid the monster under the bed was sleep with the lights on in any level that has a bed and do not look under the bed. Those would be like the instructions given to any child that would be having a night terror, and this gives the monster and the backrooms the nostalgic aura that has been mentioned before. I questioned Ms. Morales more about her predilection for entities, and she said that the entities enhance the corruptness of the backrooms and that she considered this characteristic pivotal for the whole phenomenon. So the repeating of this childhood fear and this corruptness can be related to the element of repetition that older members of the backrooms community seem to cherish. Juranovsky quotes both Eugenia de la Motte and Christine Berthin, who say respectively that in the Gothic, I quote, events escape from the temporal bounds and that there is a distortion of chronology and a temporal confusion, end of quote. So the past can come and haunt the present, as it happens with the monster under the bed and all those corruptions appearing in the backrooms. Crawford, however, mentions that control repetition can actually work against fear, and that it can be, I quote, a comforting refuge in a world otherwise grown dark and strange. The uncanny familiarity and the corruption in the liminal spaces of the backrooms is also a form of repetition. Places that we might have been in, or that we might have seen or been there before, perhaps in nostalgic media, blurry pictures, or camcorders. As Jelsinkaya mentions, the liminal space hashtag videos on TikTok are even the backrooms, and I quote, are loaded with references to childhood which serve only as a reminder of this loss of innocence, end of quote. They then proceed to quote literary theorist Frederick Jameson, who says, and I quote again, nostalgia is an alarming and pathological symptom of a society that has become incapable of dealing with time and history. So, future still looks bleak enough, and it is safe to assume that it looked even bleaker during the COVID pandemic. Anthony Cinco mentions the experience of, quoting, doom, panic, and isolation, end of quote. And of course, we had the disruption of our repetitions, our routines, our own houses and days, and so our own houses became as part of a space that, like Crawford describes, was no longer bound by the natural and probable, and the anxieties of the moment were life going nowhere. So it was only natural that the internet would grant users a place for repetitions, and even if repetitions weren't safe, like a corrupted version of a beloved video game that would not provide the player with the safe reenactment of the main character's journey, or even if users had to read around a world filled with glimpses of their past but corrupt, there was still a glimpse of familiarity and a glimpse of better times. Now mankind has almost gone back to normal, and those places have gone familiar again. But the backrooms are a reminder that for people who lost a family member on emotional space, the reminiscing will now always be corrupt, because it is a familiar place that no longer is, and it is a nostalgia for what they will never get back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to our last panelist. Alexandra Cebada is a poet and professor. Born in 1998 in Mexico City, her most recent collection of poetry, Poems for Those Who Will Never Read Them, published in 2022, deals with the intersection of the body, the object, and the feminine. She founded her own language school in 2019 and is currently enrolled in the undergraduate program of English Literature in the Facultad de Filosofía y Letras UNAM. Alexandra will present her lecture titled Conventions and Subversions of the Gothic, the Postcolonial Gothic of Helen Oyeyemi's Books and Roscs.
Thank you to everyone that could be here with us. It's really appreciated that we can talk about horror and the Gothic, especially now that we all look like a coven of witches. Thank you so much to Tani for the wonderful invitation, and it's a complete honor to be here next to the greatest. It's kind of scary, but it's quite normal. Well, we're going to come back to Gothic spaces, because one of the pinnacles of the Gothic genre is its space. Whether it's a castle, an cottage, or a forest, the dark atmosphere immersed in shadows is a poignant symbol that has defined Gothic for centuries. Since its birth, the spaces of the Gothic provide hints of uncanny nostalgia, a longing for shadows opposed to the luminous perfectionism that signified the Renaissance. The Gothic revival was marked deeply by a reconstruction of spaces from the High Middle Ages and a recuperation of its aesthetic. As said by Button, open quote, the effusive and imaginative descriptions of objects both natural and supernatural that were recovered by scholars collecting the songs and ballads of medieval culture provided the examples of a romantic and sublime way of writing. Similarly, the medieval architecture with its cathedrals, castles, and ruins became a worthy model for evocations of sublimity. The Gothic novel owes much to these developments. Therefore, as a consequence, we can see that the main roots of the Gothic genre stand with a renewal of the medieval aesthetic with the fears of the upcoming Industrial Revolution, a revival that is rooted from yearning, but that was also bred as an instrument of transgression, which is highlighted in its spaces. As said by scholar Veronica Magdelikova, it is also often the case that the setting of the story, a Roman castle, abbey, haunted house, is a character of its own, sometimes more important than some of the main characters. The Gothic genre sets out to uncover the dark and twisted corridors of human mind, where all the terrible secrets lie hidden. The reason why the Gothic lasted so long, why it's so malleable, is that it deals with the fundamental contradiction of human existence. It is the contradiction between the civilized and the barbaric, the realm of order and the realm of chaos, our space and the space of the other. End quote. Here lies the vitality of spaces in the genre and its potential for transgressiveness. We can therefore understand why the Gothic genre has evolved so widely over the years. Throughout time, authors explored the distinct facets of the Gothic and written texts that play with its usage of space in unique ways. One of such texts is the one we're going to be talking about today, Helen Oyeyemi's Books and Roses, found in the collection What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours, published in 2015. This is an adept combination of post-colonial and queer Gothic that presents its own spatial iconography intertwined with each of its characters, becoming a refreshing reclamation of the genre. The short story I will talk about today follows the tropes of the genre, like the intricate construction of atmosphere and spaces, as well as the tragically complex characters, not unlike the ones found in texts like the Castle of Otranto. However, her text also manages to create a subversion to these classic tropes by providing a unique post-colonial and queer perspective. Oyeyemi's story centers in Montserrat, a baby abandoned at a convent that finds herself growing up alone with only a key hanging by her neck to provide her with clues of her origins. The story is then tangled with other characters who are also awaiting for the loved ones in what becomes classic Gothic melodrama, where emotion and tragedy are at the core of each person surrounding Montserrat and her mysterious key. In the following paper, I will explore how space is utilized in the short story to reflect the inner conflicts of the characters and to dissect the aspects of from classical Gothic that it brings to the forefront, as well as the subversions made by Oyeyemi with the inclusion of characters that are not commonly found in classical Gothic tales. The story is framed as a fairy tale from its eponymous beginning, once upon a time. This places it with postmodern rewritings of dark fairy tales such as the ones by Angela Carter and Emma Donoghue. Yet, what makes Books and Roses stand apart is not only that it's original subject, as it's not direct rewriting, but also the confident intertextuality with which it places itself with the rest of the canonical fairy tales that have appeared throughout the centuries. It is an overtly Gothic fairy tale from its setting, since a lot of what provides the Gothic genre with its characteristic abject atmosphere is the construction of decadent spaces that reflect the deepest nature of the characters that inhabit it. Oyeyemi subverts the Gothic exploration of space by not only constructing one central location where the story unfolds, but plenty, each one representative of every character that inhabits it, and each one rooted in the tradition of the Gothic. We will begin, funnily enough, at the end of the story. In the last page that is utilized by Oyeyemi, in which she returns to the classical Gothic castle for a little while, to tell the story of Aurélie, Montserrat's mother. In this dark space, funnily enough, everything is meant to be enlightened and revealed. As Montserrat finds a letter from her mother in which she describes the events that transpired before her birth and her second abandonment. The story abruptly changes focus from Montserrat's perspective to tell the story of Aurélie, a servant at a castle who begins to sneak into the library after finding its key whilst doing laundry. There, she begins reading and slowly falling in love with the sickly brother of the castle's owner. As they both plan to get married, he dies in mysterious circumstances as she is berated by other servants about to give birth to Montserrat and writing the letter, while concealed in the library. Her ultimate fate, however, is left unknown. This space of the castle is described as decadent and classically Gothic. Aurélie's narration through the letter directly speaks with the Gothic tradition, giving themes of Dracula and Carmilla, not only with the format and the space, but with the love at the core of her narration that is rooted in the romantic idea of the sublime. Her narration finds her intertwined in a love that passes time and logic, as she falls for a terminally ill man outside her social class that she describes as loved foolishly and without regard for the time limit his learned doctors had told him he had. And a deep love for Montserrat that is imprinted in the letter and the promises that she leaves to her. The tragic love story is cut short with almost medieval weapons as the other servants blame her for stealing from the house of working. Open quote, having silver spoons thrown at you in the dark house is a terrifying thing. You see them flashing against the walls like little swords before they hit you. End quote. Amid the dark castle, the simple utensils become terrifying weapons that are reminiscent of the oblique violence found in the Gothic genre. The inclusion of Aurélie's story is an interesting vindication of a type of character that would be chastised in another type of text, since she is a pregnant single mother falling in love with an older man that is above her social class. Her inclusion, however, is no coincidence, as Oyeyemi writes space for characters that could not thrive in literature before and have the opportunity of having their stories told here. Now, going back to the first location we are introduced to, we visit the Monasterio de Montserrat, an abbey found in Catalonia that was built in the 11th century. This abbey, created in the peak of the High Middle Ages, embodies decadence inherent to Gothic, a relic that was burned and sacked repeatedly despite being surrounded by the sea on each of its sides, and that in fairy tale timelessness of the story stands as a symbol that encapsulates the struggle of its central character. Montserrat exists since her abandonment in the abbey in a liminal space, yearning for her past, a nostalgia present in all early Gothic, which in her case comes in the form of her mother. Therefore, she does not belong, always longing for a past she did not know and hope for an uncertain future. This longing can be easily associated with the type of romantic spleen found in the 19th century poetry, and Oyeyemi adds another layer to Montserrat's liminality by having her be a black woman. This other form of liminality she experiences as part of her identity encapsulates some of the most clever subversions to the genre that Oyeyemi creates in her texts, as she chooses to alter the tropes by including characters from varied identities in her stories that fuse the original emotions and effects of the Gothic with the trials of varied people. Open quote, if she'd been a white child, the monks of Santa Maria de Montserrat might have given her into the care of a local family, but she was as black as the face and hands of the Virgin Mary. End quote. As seen in this fragment, from birth, she is excluded from having a place among others, and the monastery reflects her solitude. With this, Oyeyemi constructs an important subversion with the introduction to postcolonial iconography in the Virgin of the Montserrat, because she is one of the most popular virgins of color that are adored by the Catholic Church. Her image is constantly compared with Montserrat, and she has a special connection to her. Open quote. She was a daughter of the Virgin of Montserrat, and she felt instinctively and of course heretically that the Virgin herself was only a symbol of yet a great sister mother who was carefree and sorrowful and was. End quote. Oyeyemi here speaks with the Gothic tradition, using its inherent transgressiveness to give a voice to Montserrat, engaging in the postcolonial act of writing back, as stated by postcolonial critic Sarah Inlet. Open quote. The act of writing back and entering into dialogue with specific Gothic novels is evident in many of the most canonized texts in the body of postcolonial Gothic literature. As such, postcolonial Gothic simultaneously appropriates the language of the Gothic and abrogates its ideologies, while displacing the central concerns of Imperial Gothic by centralizing those who were once marginalized and made monstrous. End quote. Thus, in the space where Montserrat grows up, is a reappropriation of the classic Gothic abbey with imagery that is entwined to the Black diaspora. The following location of Casa Mila is perhaps the most unique space found in the story and is tied to one of the most unique characters, Señora Lucy. The house is located in Barcelona and is popularly known as La Pedrera. It is the only modernist construction that is highlighted in the story, but nevertheless, its place in the sequence of events is as vital to the Gothic atmosphere of the story as the rest of the locations. Since the beginning, there is a sense of abjection that the community surrounding the building express about it. The dubious nature of its inhabitants who engage in activities that are not widely accepted by the highly religious Spanish society portrayed in the story is tied to this strange aesthetic. It is said about the house. A notable newspaper critic had described this effect as being that of a pernicious sensuality. And as if that wasn't enough, the entire construction blushed a truly disgraceful peachy pink at sunset and dawn. Respectable citizens couldn't help but feel that the house expressed the disposition of its inhabitants, who must surely be either mad or unceasingly engaged on indecent activities. The outrage surrounding the house is exacerbated by the space itself, since the construction is not of a common building with uniquely crooked walls that give it a surreal effect. In the same manner as the building itself, its inhabitants are chastised in ridiculous ways for being different. This is clear with the character of Señora Lucy, a painter who lives in the house and defends it from its critics with passion. She is introduced because Montserrat begins to work in Casa Mila, and is one of the few people that finds the place beautiful, and she connects with Señora Lucy by their shared appreciation for the architecture of the house. Then later, we find out that they both share a key, and they are both waiting for someone. The narration abruptly begins to tell the story of Señora Lucy, and her romance with her fellow scammers Happy. Both women dedicated their lives to con rich people by pretending to be rich themselves. Yet they both found in love, and after a great romantic gesture and wrongly, they are separated, leaving Lucy waiting for her lover to return. Once more, Oyeyemi takes the iconic story of two lovers being tragically torn apart by circumstances and places two queer women at the forefront, reclaiming the power of having their stories told. Despite queer theory not being an established field of academic study until the late 1980s, queerness in literature has always existed, and transgressions of gender and sexuality have always been present in the Gothic genre since the 18th century. As Mariana Enriquez observes, queerness in text is often defined as, quote, definitional indeterminacy and elasticity, end quote. This quote can also be said to define the objection of the Gothic, and in this text, Oyeyemi finds intersections between queerness and Gothic, presenting a sublime romance retaken by queer imagery. These transgressions highlight an ostracized Señora Lucy living in a society that reprimands anything that varies from the norm, leading her to become monstrous out of her pure distance from social convention. Oyeyemi then masterfully recreates the ridiculous extent of this problem with the usage of Casa Mila, which is attested by people only for being different from the rest of the spaces in the story. Oyeyemi's text, then, becomes a perfect example of the Gothic genre in the way that it utilizes space to not only create atmosphere, but also to deepen characters in further unique imagery that stays in the reader's imagination long after it has been read. And with her masterful usage of spaces, it lies in open dialogue with the Gothic genre and its spaces that takes its conventions to provide a voice for characters that didn't have such a prominent and firm voice in this text before. Many of us here grew up with a certain idea of the Gothic, whether it relied on abstract castles, damsels in distress, tyrants, or conventional love stories between a hero and a dame that would be either rescued or sacrificed. Texts like Books and Roses remind us of the importance of writing stories with characters from diverse backgrounds, designing new imagery and iconography that celebrates our own identities, so that the next generation knows that we are the makers of our own stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of the panelists. Let's move on to the question and answer session from the audience. And I would also like to remind you that we will be starting our next panel at around 12:05 p.m. So, if you have any questions or comments.
I have one, rather than question, an invitation to continue the conversation. Thanks again to all the ones included here. As Alex mentioned, the coincidence or intentional, whether or not, of all of us dressing in black in the chair. Anyway, this is mainly for Aurora and Helen. Girls, do you think these Gothic perspectives, like the ones you propose today or you approach today for your studies, can help establish better discourses or even reopen discourses that we have been neglected with, in the case of Aurora, our past inside nature, and with Helen, our uncertain technological future?
I believe yes, but I believe they also, well, at least what I propose takes a recent, also technological past. The backrooms are in a way also related to many memories of the pre-internet era, as they are related to our uncertain future, not only technological, but also in a way, yes, ecological, and even like Dr. Piñeiro said, and the eco-Gothic things, is there are many levels that I didn't include here, but they include ruinous cities like taken over by nature. And there are also levels that include quite the aesthetic, as youngsters would say, that they call vaporwave or neon wave, that hints to these futuristic ideas. But the majority of the levels also talk about, like they said, the pre-internet place, where the simpler times. So I would guess they would talk about like people from my generation, like going to the arcade, perhaps people even older, like just, or playing outside, or not being there. So I guess it's a dialogue between the uncertain future, but also a dialogue between a past that might be idealized, even if it's not like, totally bucolic or natural. There is also like an element of an idealized pre-internet past.
Thank you. Yes, I do agree with that although it is always difficult for Gothic to be optimistic, cliche meaning of such a word, there are many contemporary words that do not deny the possibility of this nostalgia for either pre-Christian, pre-internet, third phase capitalism, consumerism type of societies being an opportunity for a rebuild. And in the case, particularly in the case of eco-Gothic, I think that one of the trends in it that somehow makes an emphasis on the possibilities of life coming back is mycotic thinking. The one that, among other things, explores the presence of fungi in the forest, specifically in this Gothic space, and although the fungi is associated to death and decomposing, etc., etc., it is also associated to the coming back of life or the possibility of recreating life. And I would say that even more interestingly, the possibility of escaping binary systems of thought as it gets closer, or it may be interpreted as a step forward into the less rhizomatic idea of thinking dynamics. So in that sense, yes, there is hope. Not everything is apocalyptic in this approach to pandemics and illness and the Gothic spaces associated to viruses and destruction.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, good. My first question is for Aurora. Aurora, I was recently introduced to the term the technological sublime. And as it was explained to me, the person said that it is a sublime that is worried about the technological footprint that we're leaving. And it has occurred to me to use this term to understand the Celtic tiger, or the literature that emerges from the Celtic tiger, and in particular the one that written in the book by Tana French and the adaptation. So do you know anything about this sublime technological? And if you do, can you please tell me how you see it in the texts you analyze?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think there is a question that connects with the idea of solastalgia, which I didn't manage to explain because I was running out of time. But I have a long quotation defining solastalgia here, not the one I included in the PowerPoint. And at some point in this quotation, when explaining solastalgia, the author says, any context in which pervasive change, I want to get to the part of technology. Yes. Any context in which pervasive change to the existing order challenges place identity has potential to deliver solastalgia. Transformative technologies and emergent disease for human and non-human life have enabled change to occur to cultural and natural environments at a speed that makes adaptation difficult, if not impossible. So in this sense, I think that this technological uncanny is a consequence of an era, it is the aftermath of an era that idolized technology for at least 2 decades or 2 or 3 decades. And now the environmental crisis, among other things, has forced us to reconsider the role of technology in relation to the continuity of life. Technology may solve certain things, but does not hold the answer for life to thrive. So in that sense, in the same way that we have the natural uncanny or the supernatural uncanny, now we have the technological uncanny as a man-made kind of wonderful creation, but at the same time an apocalyptic version of this wonderful creation, of what used to be considered a wonderful tool, a wonderful instrument. So yes, I think it connects with eco-Gothic in general and the concept of solastalgia in particular, and it explores the darkest side of the consequences of our obsessive use of technology as an equivalent of what happened during the Industrial Revolution, the idea that that was going to bring equality and well-being and progress as it was understood at that time. Well, this echoes that deception or disenchantment with the possibility of solutions being a one-factor type of solution.
Thank you very much for that. And Helen. First, I want to say that I have heard of the bathroom before in podcasts, and I feel very validated because I thought I was losing my time. But now you come here and explain it academically, and I think it was brilliant. So starting from that, when I heard the concept of the backrooms and people talking about the nostalgia, I couldn't see it, and I still am unsure whether to believe in nostalgia or not. And in particular, that has to do with the fact that I think internet can be a very, 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 very dark place. A place that can corrupt in a very similar fashion to a contagion. So I was thinking of Slenderman, and I was thinking of how Slenderman transcended its internet times and into the psyches of people, actual people, and how there was a murder committed in relation to Slenderman. So I do understand that there is a certain sense of comfort in the whole idea of the bathroom, but I also think that we can see it as contagious. People getting into spaces that might have been unsafe, for example, to achieve a picture to upload to the internet. So I was wondering if you could, if you will, explore this internet creation as contagion, as instead of viewing it as comforting.
It oscillates, and it also happens like in the last level, they say that it oscillates between anxiety and discomfort, and comfort and nostalgia. So, and that is the thing where the horror resides, because it can be both comforting, but at the same time there is also the feeling that something is off. So I think that this has become a sort of widespread thing, especially during the pandemic. And yes, I actually had like the whole Slenderman thing, and I know the internet can be a very dark place, but I had to delete the whole thing because my paper was like already overflowing with stuff. So I even had like an exploration on the internet being a rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole having a sense of entrapment, which is also a Gothic thing, because in a way, when we fall down the rabbit hole, the person that I saw for that thing was named Catherine Schulz. I was reading her column, and she was like, oh, but the rabbit hole is good because we are learning. Well, not always. The internet is also like this new virtual incarnation of the labyrinth, which is also a Gothic element in its own sense. And well, we might be clicking around on YouTube like, ha, fun things, and then we start suddenly going to the news or what happened. This might not have happened to your generation, but for me, when I was in the early stages of Tumblr, there was no preview of the picture. So it was like super easy for you to tell them, hey, check out this picture of in Twitter, sorry. And you would click on the Twitter link, and they would send you usually gore pictures, illegal links. Twitter was a war zone. And that was like an idea of the, well, no, right now it is for different reasons, but then when it was like more of a, it was like more of a no man's land. Right now it's like a bit more of a different war zone. No, back then it was no man's land. And it was like really easy to find like essentially things that you were not supposed to see or that would unease you, and it was like this Gothic thing of you never know what's going to be there around the corner. You never know what's waiting for you in this labyrinth. You never know what's waiting behind that closed door. And it was also contagious, because for one moment in Twitter, everybody was sending like these horrible pictures and these horrible videos and things like that. So there is an element of that, but I have also seen like this thing becoming very popular. There was like even an app, I cannot remember, that said like, okay, I can't remember the name of the app for it, but it was like, they're going to choose a random location.
It's random.
Thank you, random. And something happened that people were deliberately endangering themselves just to see what had happened there. So, and it was something really bad, and it became popular for a moment. And I think it was also because in the pandemic, people were desperately looking like for something to do. But also, I think there's also this idea of the media about doing investigations, going that, but also it's this whole attraction to danger, dark side, and these things. I believe that what the Gothic has in us is that, and the danger of it is that the uncanny is dangerous, but at the same time, it's very attractive. And this is also why the backrooms are in a sense attractive. even if they are like, you know, not the best way. And don't worry about losing the time. This came also from a moment in which I was like wasting a lot of time during the pandemic. So yeah.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much.
I think those two participations, and that's it. Would you please go ahead?
So I have a question for Helen. In the topic of internet horror and how it has evolved from something that you stumbled upon and maybe you didn't know who created it or what was, maybe it was more word of mouth, to now that we have big projects like the Backrooms or the SCP Foundations or the works of Trevor Henderson, in which the audience has actual knowledge of what goes into creating these and the process. Do you believe that this movement from something that was a little bit more like far away from oneself to something that is a little bit more collective, in which people collaborate to create these things, could be interpreted as people trying to find connection with others through the internet, even in this feeling that there is something wrong with the world, especially in this time of the pandemic?
Especially that. I believe that precisely just like it happened with the Backrooms in Latin America, that I forgot to upload the picture, but the comments were of course laughing and people saying like Sacramento in Latin America and things like that. But that, I think that we could see that in that. Even if it's, you know, like fun in a way, they were expressing their collective fear. And I think that it's a way of coming together and expressing a collective fear that is also expressed like in more serious ways, like books, like the books that were quoted. They were especially written by women, and they said because us women feel like perhaps stronger the fear of walking alone at night. But as you can see, it's a collective fear, and people come together in order to express this fear and express the horror in their lives.
Well, my question is also for Helena. And it relates to that collectivity, not only in the sense of creation, but also in reception. Because your approach made me think a lot about how these stories are created and the intention they have. Because, yeah, you stumble into things like Slenderman, Picasso's, etc. But your approach was also really emphasized the part of how the users interacted with these things and how the experience of actually reading them or watching them or whatever also added to this idea of fear. So do you think the way these stories are created in the internet inherently need that type of kind of user interaction in order to be complete? Or do you think that they are kind of like something by themselves and then they get signified by the interaction with the online community?
Both. I believe that during the pandemic we were in the desperate need for interaction, so I think that this is why also this phenomenon speaks, like, you know, and also this whole idea of collectiveness and creating collectively, but we could not go out and create, so we create virtually because now it's very easy. And the resignification, I think, connects with what I mentioned about the emotional space. The spaces in the Backrooms are mostly also resignified by what we see. And I think that we can also have, like, because now technology is pervasive in all our lives, like we can also resignify virtual spaces. Like, for example, maybe you're too young for this, but in the quote from Tumblr, they were like quotes from MySpace, and oh my god. For us, that has also become like an emotional space. And of course, I was also going to talk about resignification, but time constraints. I showed a woman I know the picture of the arcade. She is a Gen Xer, and there was an emotional attachment to it. For my parents, the picture of the arcade reminded of me and my brother when we were young. For the Gen Xer, the arcade was a place for fun, but also like for a bit more adult pursuits. You go to the arcade, you have your boyfriend, maybe afterwards you go drinking, whatever. For my brother and I, the arcade meant our childhood. And for younger generations, it meant something that they saw in media, that they perhaps didn't live or wish to live. So I guess this is a moment in which the collaboration works on all these senses, and that is why we have both.
Thank you.
we will have to finish the section of answers and questions for today. So that would be all for today's panel. I would like to thank everyone, once again, the panelists as well as the audience for assisting today. And I would like to encourage you all to assist to the following panel, which starts in a bit. Thank you very much.
Hola a todos los que nos acompañan, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. El día de hoy vamos a continuar con los paneles, con el maravilloso Alejandro de las Fuentes Cerón, que es licenciado en Letras Modernas Inglesas por la Facultad de la Filosofía y Letras de la UNAM. Entre sus intereses se destacan los estudios de la memoria en la narrativa contemporánea. Actualmente funge como asistente del profesor de la doctora Aurora Piñeiro, con quien imparte el seminario de literatura gótica y el curso de literatura en inglés 6, literatura del siglo XX, de la licenciatura de letras inglesas. Su ponencia, Sangraba por la boca, sangraban sus manos, el cuerpo enfermo como representación del trauma en la casa de Adela de Montes. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, gracias por quedarse, y a los que llegaron en esta hora, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Pues empezamos. Sangraba por la boca, sangraban sus manos, el cuerpo enfermo como representación del trauma en la casa de Adela de Mariana Enriquez. Como bien advierte Cynthia Cole en su estudio sobre la obra de George Lickard, existen numerosos ejemplos literarios en los que la presencia de uno o más cuerpos que se oponen a los estereotipos de lo que se considera normal confronta al lector con la maldad propia de la sociedad que se retrata en determinado contexto. La aparición de anormalidades anatómicas, mutilaciones o enfermedades tienden a ir más allá de la caracterización individual de un personaje y pueden simbolizar malestares de la sociedad como conflictos raciales, luchas laborales y de género, hipocresía religiosa o la codicia de la clase dominante. De modo que los males del cuerpo político se enlazan con los males del cuerpo enfermo o discrepante. Asimismo, es posible establecer una relación entre el estado del cuerpo y las condiciones socioculturales de una región, pues si analizamos, por ejemplo, los textos de autores como William Faulkner o Carson McCullers, propios de la tradición del gótico sureño, encontramos personajes con distintas características morfológicas asociadas con lo anormal o extraño que se vinculan con la decadencia crónica del área que pretenden representar. No es de extrañar, por tanto, que abunden en la escritura de la autora Mariana Enriquez figuras relacionadas con la enfermedad o la mutilación corporal. Textos como Nada de carne sobre nosotras, Bajo el agua negra, ¿no? Lamentablemente es algo que nos suena de diario, ¿no? Y que por lo tanto sí es importante, es justo lo que yo quería como enfatizar en esto, ¿no? El aspecto sobrenatural sí tiene que, está más bien como pretexto quizás para irnos a hablar de todas estas situaciones de violencia en el país, de violencia de género específicamente, ¿no? Y que creo que sí podríamos, pues, se abre la puerta también a hablar no solo de este texto, sino de la obra de Mariana Enriquez en general, con un enfoque de género. Creo que sí se puede y deberíamos.
Para Eduardo, ¿consideras tú que en la obra de Hodgson hay cierto optimismo? Lo pregunto porque ahorita salió a colación, ¿no? De la literatura gótica en general hay como un cierto pesimismo, ¿no? Y en general en la literatura de terror siempre hay como un final no tan feliz, digamos. Pero leyendo la obra de algunos de los cuentos de Hodgson y algunas de sus novelas, me da la impresión que él trata mucho este tema de la voluntad humana para sobrevivir, ¿no? Y sobreponerse a la naturaleza, ¿no? Que siento que también es algo como muy autobiográfico de él, porque tiene un escrito, bueno, él fue marinero en su juventud y sobrevivió incluso a los ojos de los huracanes y tal. Entonces, ¿crees tú que hay cierto optimismo?
Sí. Por ejemplo, como ya se mencionó en el panel anterior, es muy difícil ser optimistas cuando se trata de gótico. Estos dos textos tienen, por ejemplo, finales que considero pesimistas, tristes, el barco destruido, la familia completamente consumida, y un pequeño hint a que el Tom, el hombre en el barco, también se ha contagiado, al igual que la pareja varada. Pero creo que sí hay un pequeño hint de, ¿cómo dijiste tú? De positivismo, de optimismo, gracias, de optimismo, sobre todo en The Voice in the Night. Al final, a fin de cuentas, la pareja sigue intentando sobrevivir, y aunque han sido consumidos por este hongo, tratan de continuar adelante. El hombre sigue buscando comida para su esposa, tratan de mantener es como agridulce, tratan de mantener como un status quo, pero a fin de cuentas siguen adelante. Tratan de seguir ya adaptados dentro de la naturaleza con su vida como si no estuviera pasando. ¿Es posible? Puedo concederle a Hudson un poco de optimismo, muy agridulce, pero ahí está. Sí, lo creo.
Gracias.
No es pregunta, solo seguir comentando lo que estabas diciendo. Creo que también, no sé tú dime si me equivoco, pero creo que también sería como reintegrar al hombre en la naturaleza, o sea, en la medida de que su voluntad ya no es como un algo externo artificial, sino algo que también la naturaleza lo ha vestido con, ¿sabes? Entonces sí, o sea, es como optimista en la medida en que también lo vuelve a ver como parte de este mundo, que sigue sus instintos y que simplemente sigue adelante sin como temas personales de venganza o como odio ahí.
De hecho, sí, algo que ya tampoco alcancé a meter por razones de tiempo fue que al final de cuentas el terror en A Voice in the Night nace de resistirse a integrarse a este hongo. La familia cuando la familia cuando es contagiada por el hongo sienten esta especie de hambre por este hongo gris al mismo tiempo, y el hongo gris de alguna forma los persigue. Entonces el miedo nace de no querer integrarse a esta mecánica, y al final pues no tienen de otra. Entonces optimista en el sentido de vuelve a ser integrarse, muy a su pesar, a integrarse a esta naturaleza.
Muchas gracias a todos los que nos acompañaron el día de hoy. Los invitamos a continuar en las cuentas que provengan más tarde. Muchísimas gracias a todos, gracias a Eduardo, gracias a Alejandra y gracias a Antonio.